Hello, everyone, and welcome. We'll get started soon. We're letting people join the webinar. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to this Nutrition for Growth side event on multisectoral collaboration and action, practical insights for addressing malnutrition. My name is Ellen Piwaz, and I'm the moderator for today's virtual event. This session is co-hosted by the Power of Nutrition, represented by Dr. Alok Ranjan, and by Nutrition International, represented by Dr. Mandana Arabi. Before turning the floor over to Alok for opening remarks, I want to say a few words about what's in store over the next 90 minutes. I'm pleased to say that we plan to have an energetic and interactive conversation with panelists from around the world, and true to the title of this session, from across sectors, across institutions, and across development contexts. Our panelists represent government, civil society, implementing partners, development banks, and donors, and they bring to this discussion close to 300 cumulative years of experience working on complex multisectoral problems and programs. Our goal today is not to rehash why multisectoral approaches are needed to address malnutrition. I think this has been discussed many, many times before. What we aim to do today is to discuss how to work across sectors and share practical and perhaps sometimes difficult lessons that have been learned over the years related to multisectoral collaboration, coordination, and action. The discussion will cover three broad areas. First, upstream lessons for designing and supporting multisectoral nutrition partnerships and programs, downstream lessons related to delivery, impact, and accountability, and finally, calls to action for the future. This is a side event for the Nutrition for Growth Summit, so we hope to leave today with concrete ideas and messages. I invite all participants to join the conversation by asking questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We also invite you to introduce yourself in the chat and describe why you're interested in this topic. Please note the session will be recorded. The recording link will be emailed to everyone, and the recording itself will be posted on the Power of Nutrition's YouTube channel after the session. The organizers will be creating a summary report, and this will be published by the N4G Secretariat in the new year. And finally, we encourage you to post about the session on social media. We hope you enjoy and benefit from today's dialogue. And without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Alok Ranjan. Alok is Director of Investments at the Power of Nutrition. A medical doctor with postgraduate degree in community medicine by training, I know Alok well from his prior experience and work leading the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's nutrition programs in India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and South Asia. And before that, for his work with UNICEF. Welcome, Alok. The floor is yours for opening and context-setting remarks. Over to you.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for the kind introduction. And on behalf of the Power of Nutrition and our co-partner of this Nutrition for Growth side event, Nutrition International, I would like to thank you for moderating this session. You have been one of the biggest advocates and champions that I know for the focus on generating evidence, to developing policies based on those evidence, and for bringing those policies to action. Hence the entire spectrum of evidence to policy to action for nutrition programming. And we are so excited that you're helping us anchor this important conversation today. I would also like to welcome and thank all the panelists for today's webinar, who will undoubtedly make this an enriching experience for all of us. And last but not the least, I would also like to thank all the participants listening to this webinar, and would encourage, as Ellen said, to participate and share your insights via the chat and question answers at the bottom of the window that you have open. Both organizations, the Power of Nutrition and the Nutrition International, we strongly support the multisectoral aspect of addressing malnutrition. At the Power of Nutrition, our vision is a world where every child has the right nutrition to achieve their full potential. We do this by raising money and creating partnerships to advance the fight against malnutrition, especially in Africa and Asia. Through our partnerships, we aim for more children, adolescents, and women to receive improved nutrition services and support through the holistic programming that tackle the drivers of malnutrition through a multisectoral approach. But when we think of multisectoral approaches for addressing malnutrition, there are three questions that kind of come to my mind. Why do we need a multisectoral approach for addressing malnutrition? What all do we need to include to be a part of a multisectoral approach for addressing malnutrition? And third question being, how do we bring such multisectoral approaches into action? So for the first question, why multisectoral approaches? I think it's an easier question. Whether we pick up the Lancet series, the latest Lancet series that came out in March 2021 on maternal and child nutrition, or the exemplar work on stunting reduction by Gates Venture. All these point towards the fact that there is need for more and more multisectoral approaches. In March 21, this year, the Nutrition Year of Action, the Lancet Maternal and Child Nutrition series, it published 3 papers summarizing the latest research in maternal and child nutrition and what works. Some key highlights which I would like to share here, which includes the facts that all sectors have the potential to implement policy actions that will directly or indirectly impact nutrition outcomes. Better nutrition outcomes are consistently seen in programs that deliver cross-sectoral interventions or combine multiple delivery platforms. Indirect actions targeting underlying and social determinants of malnutrition, including poverty, fertility, agriculture, WASH, and parental education, they collectively account for approximately 50% of explained reduction in stunting. In addition to the Lancet MNCH series, the learning and positive practices evidenced from the nutrition exemplar countries, including Peru, Nepal, Ethiopia, Senegal, and Kyrgyz Republic, who have made extraordinary progress in reducing their stunting prevalence, also strongly points towards the role of multisectoral approaches in improving nutrition outcomes in these contexts. On the second question, which is what includes multisectoral, and I think this audience of participants and the panelists, they don't need any introduction to the nutrition direct and indirect or the nutrition specific and sensitive interventions. Many nutrition stakeholders are already expanding beyond working predominantly through health systems to place greater attention on other drivers of malnutrition, including water, sanitation, hygiene, that is WASH, food systems, social protection, education, climate change, gender, and maternal mental health. More and more stakeholders need to explore holistic and multisectoral approaches to tackling malnutrition, breaking down the perennial silos that have persisted in nutrition sector with greater collaboration and joint impact. So coming to the final question and the main focus of this panel discussion, the rationale for a multisectoral approach for addressing malnutrition is clear, but what may be less clear here is how to achieve this in practice. So this N4G Side-Event, co-hosted by the Power of Nutrition and the Nutrition International, aims to share these practical insights on how to optimize multisectoral approaches and collaboration in large-scale nutrition programs. A diverse panel with expertise from government, multisectoral and bilateral agencies and civil society will discuss enabling conditions and strategies for overcoming challenges related to multisectoral partnership. Panelists will debate cross-cutting opportunities for impact in the context of the N4G Summit. The session will promote dialogue between panelists and participants on how to make successful multisectoral nutrition approaches a reality and accelerate progress towards global nutrition goals. So nutrition, in spite of being impacted by so many sectors, has remained mostly voiceless, unmeasured, orphan, and invisible in the past, something a previous colleague of mine had described nutrition to be. Can we change that with this Nutrition for Growth Summit in 2021, with the set of commitments we all are coming together for, so that we have a future of multisectoral programming that addresses malnutrition effectively, not only at the planning stage, but being effective in terms of the implementation on the ground level too. And instead of being an orphan sector, can nutrition be something that all sectors champion together? As the famous African proverb says, if we want to go quickly, go alone. If we want to go far, go together. So for us to achieve our World Health Assembly targets and the Sustainable Development Goal, we need to go together, and multisectoral nutrition approaches could be the most effective way for us to go together and go far in addressing malnutrition. We hope that the panelists and participants would leave today's session with some more tangible, practical insights for multisectoral approaches at addressing malnutrition. Thank you all, and I will pass it back to Ellen. Thanks, Ellen.
Wonderful, Alok, and thank you so much for laying things out so clearly. I'm now pleased to introduce today's panel. There are 7 panelists, so please bear with me on these introductions. I'd first like to welcome Joachim Bimo to the panel. Joachim is the head of development cooperation for Sweden at the Swedish Embassy in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, a position he's held for the last 2.5 years. He's previously worked at the global level at SIDA, at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and also as a business entrepreneur. We're pleased to have Joachim here to reflect on Sweden's approach to working across the humanitarian, development, and peace-building nexus to improve nutrition. Welcome, Joachim. I'd next like to introduce Samuel Dusungumva. He's the permanent secretary at the local Ministry of Local Government in Rwanda. This is the ministry that's responsible for coordinating technical, administrative, and operational aspects of local government, including delivery of Rwanda's multisectoral nutrition program. Before taking this post in 2019, Samuel worked for various public, intergovernmental, and private organizations. So we're really pleased to have you here today with us, Samuel, to share lessons from Rwanda. Dr. Denisa Elena Ionete is ambassador of the European Union, serving in Niger since 2018. A medical doctor and epidemiologist by training, Ambassador Ionete has more than 25 years of experience working across countries and sectors, including as head of the Crisis Management and Fragility Management Unit at the European Commission's Directorate General for Development Cooperation. We're so pleased to have you here today, Ambassador, to reflect on your experience and lessons from Niger. Menno Mulder-Sabunda is a senior nutrition specialist at the World Bank with over 30 years of international experience working on multisectoral approaches to malnutrition policy development and implementation. At the bank, he's successfully prepared and supervised lending operations throughout sub-Saharan Africa. We're pleased to have Menno here today to reflect on his experience in several countries, including but not limited to Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, the Gambia, Malawi, and Senegal. Welcome, Menno. I'd next like to introduce Pooja Pandayrana. She works for Helen Keller International as Chief of Party for the USAID-funded Sahara 2 program in Nepal. Sahara, which means good nutrition, is now in its 10th year. It's large scale and it's multisectoral. Pooja has more than 20 years of experience in public health, and Nepal is a positive exemplar for stunning reduction. So we're so pleased to have Pooja here today to reflect on her experience making multisectoral nutrition programs a reality. Welcome, Pooja. Dr. Sheikh Shahed Rahman works for Save the Children as Chief of Party for the Suchna program, a large food security and nutrition program funded by the UK government and the EU in Bangladesh. He's also General Secretary of the Civil Society Alliance for the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement in Bangladesh. Shahed is a medical graduate with public health training, and we're so pleased to have him here with us today to discuss how Bangladesh has maximized multisectoral delivery and impact. So welcome, Shahed. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Megan Rhodes. She's a career civil servant at USAID with more than 20 years of international development experience. She joined USAID's Bureau of Resilience and Food Security in February 2020 as the Division Chief of Nutrition Technical Services. Megan has worked in over a dozen countries, including 3 years as a health officer in Uganda. We're pleased to have Megan here today to reflect on USAID's experience, both globally and locally. So welcome, Megan. So now that you're all introduced, thank you. I'd like to kick off the discussion with a few upstream questions related to lessons on how to design, govern, and support multisectoral programs. As you heard, each of you works in a different country and context with different roles in these efforts, but everyone should feel free to speak up. I may be asking some of you specific questions directly, but if anyone else wants to add on, please use your hand raise function or just give me a hand signal so I can invite you to speak. Okay, so let's get started. I want to start off with a short conversation on the topic of political will. Political will is necessary to move any agenda forward, yet it can be elusive. So I thought I'd start with you, Menno. From your experience across countries at the World Bank, can you talk about what the most effective narratives have been in your experience for motivating decision makers to get behind multisectoral approaches to nutrition? Do you have any thoughts on how to create a human understanding of the issue that will create momentum for action? Menno?
Many thanks, Ellen. Maybe just a few words, starting off basically like anything in nutrition, that there are no silver bullets, no one answer that will guarantee success, unfortunately. But we do have some general lessons and that we can use as ingredients for this. One thing I've really learned from my experience is that the word nutrition itself is often a little bit of a handicapped term, in the sense that it's very broad and it's a bit confusing because it means so many different things to different people. And when you are faced with decision makers, key decision makers, many will start thinking immediately of food. I've really learned that it is far more important to speak in terms of outcomes, things on child growth, child development as determinants of human capital, and build some compelling narrative around that, and that has a number of sound bites or knowledge nuggets that they can carry home. You can never really predict where they will sort of jump on, but in Malawi, just as an example, I remember that we played with the term of brain drain, that indeed, apart from professionals leaving the country, there was a major brain drain happening in the early years. And that caught on with the Ministry of Finance, and it had been repeated for years. In Benin, we had a similar one with the issue on brain development. They really caught on to the evidence of 1 million connections per second, and that happened during the first few years in brain development. That was so baffling to the decision makers that indeed they kept talking about that. What is important that with that narrative is that to motivate decision makers, you need to have clear-cut decisions that they can work for. And so the discourse needs to come with concrete proposals, really action oriented, which requires a lot of groundwork with your stakeholders because they need to be on one line. And with that, I would say no narrative, no common understanding without a national leader or national leaders. That is so super important, that you have had people on the ground that understand the strategic context, the strategic communications that can be employed. So these are some of the key things I can just sort of think of. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks so much, Menno. I really like the idea of human capital and the brain drain. I think the narrative and message around brain and how malnutrition affects that gray matter infrastructure and that brain development has really resonated. And you mentioned, following it up with concrete actions and leading voices. I want to turn the question over to you, Samuel. What's worked in Rwanda? What have been the main approaches for generating political will?
Thank you very much, Dr. Allen. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Like my colleague was saying, you cannot say that there is a silver bullet. I think the issue of malnutrition is a very, very, very strong problem, and it requires a lot of efforts from different stakeholders. But like you rightly said, political will is extremely important. In our own case, in Rwanda, the leadership of the country from the top, the president of the republic, Mr. Paul Kagame, really emphasized on the, on the outcome. If you don't tackle the issue of malnutrition, then the effects are long term. So that's how it was decided by the country that we should come up with a holistic approach. First, you need to understand the problem. The issue of data is very, very critical, so that everybody knows that if you don't put together all the efforts, then you cannot make it. Second, there is an issue of awareness, because if all the citizens understand that this is a very big problem for the country, then you can have the contribution of everybody, because they know that the constituency, that is the general population, understand the dynamics of the problem and they are willing to contribute to that. And this is how you can rally all the the stakeholders, including civil society, including faith-based organizations, because in our own case in Rwanda, more than 90% of the population are Christians. So you can bring all the forces together to tackle this big problem. Third one is when you look at our own situation, the issue of advocacy, because when you tackle a big problem like malnutrition, it requires a lot of funding, a lot of financing, and for you to be able to collect that, you need to have people understand what needs to be done. So I think political will is a result of what needs to be done, but the impact that this is going to have on the general population. So in our own case, when the president put down the agenda for tackling some of the issues around malnutrition outstanding, and rallying with all the stakeholders, it really provided a momentum for the multisectoral approach, because people come together when they understand what needs to be done and how it is going to contribute to the general policy orientation.
Wow, thank you so much. That's really brilliant points you've just made about the importance of having both high-level commitment, but also mobilizing the grassroots, getting civil society involved, and the important role of advocacy. I want to just now turn to addressing some more complicated issues around cooperation and coordination. We know that addressing nutrition requires cooperation and coordination across sectors, across institutions, and how to do this successfully really is an open question. I don't think anyone ever gets trained in the art, or perhaps it's a science, of reaching across sectors and institutions. So I'm curious to hear this morning or today about your perspectives on how to bring different sectors or actors from different institutions and development perspectives together. Are there governance structures, organizing principles, or coordination modalities that make sense? And then the question of ownership. How do you create ownership among so many multiple different partners? Let's start with you, Joachim. Can you tell us your perspective?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ellen. So here in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we have been working a lot with working across the three pillars of the humanitarian development and peace nexus. And that has obviously to do with the situation the country is in, with a big humanitarian crisis, with ongoing armed conflict in the east, and at the same time, very underdeveloped country. And I would say it's three areas that are important in this aspect. It's joint analysis, joint objectives, and then to invest in coordination at different levels. And when you look at our case here, the joint analysis was really very much about bringing the three tribes together, people working in the humanitarian side, working in the development side, and working in the peace building to do this joint analysis. And when you did that, we have the numbers of 42% children who suffer from stunting. We have 23% suffer from wasting, and we have a country with 90 million people and 18 million children. So the numbers are enormous here, and 5 million people are internally displaced. So, and when you look at this and you ask yourself, okay, so why do we have these high numbers? Then of course there's a number of reasons, and one is conflict, armed conflict, so people have to flee, and access to land, of course, to agriculture, but you also have bad practices in terms of one-sided food, and you have low yields from agriculture, and you have all these different types of reasons behind. So the joint analysis leads also us to believe that the response must be multisectoral. The response needs to be to fight all these reasons. And then, of course, the joint objectives. When we set these three groups together and did this analysis, we also came up with 4 collective outcomes that cuts across all the areas. And one of them was nutrition and food security, and because it touches on all the 3 areas. And then to invest in coordination, then to be able to adapt to a context that is changing is super important in a big country, on the national level, provincial level, and the local level. And here we, of course, work a lot to interact with the Congolese government, but ownership is very difficult in a country like the DRC, actually. So you have to have a broader view on the ownership issue, because the local authorities, the provincial authorities, and national authorities are not always the most competent actors at all the different levels. So you have to have a more inclusive view of the ownership. The ownership can also be faith-based organizations. It can also be NGOs working on the ground. And to secure all the actors and competences needed is something that we find really important. Working with the WFP, FAO, INGOs like Search for Common Ground, in this case, to bring the issue of peace and reconciliation and negotiation around access to land. Work with UNICEF, of course, to have the nutrition component. Work with the organizations like Give Directly for the cash transfers, and that also links to nutrition. And faith-based organizations like Catholic Relief Services, so then can work with the Congolese Caritas. I think all to have this also multiplied approach when it comes to actors, it's important to have the multisectoral approach.
Thank you so much, Joachim. So what I take away from what you've just said is do joint analysis, create joint objectives, coordinate across levels, and above all, be inclusive. Ambassador, I was wondering from your experience, what do you think?
Yes, thank you. Well, I would go back maybe one step to the issue of the political will, because, we used to say that political will is a sum of the political want, of the political can, and of the political must. Otherwise, political will means decision maker that need to want to undertake an action. They feel confident that they can take it, and they must undertake, and the commitment, they feel that they must undertake that action. And I would say that from my experience, both in the field, because I worked also in Afghanistan, I worked also in Chad, in Palestine, I think that what was first was a call for action from the field. And speaking about my last posting about Niger, the tremendous crisis from 2005, 2011, which emerged, this call for action in a specific political context, which was also that of a new beginning of a country which had gone through a coup d'etat. In Niger, there are, historically these type of events. And now we managed this year, in fact, to get over this, this situation. And I think it was the clear political and policy guidance in engaging everybody along this line against the background of international commitment and support. I can remember that 10 years ago when we were discussing here in Niger, not me, my predecessor, but I was discussing it from the headquarters in Brussels, the big international initiatives, SHARE and AGIR were born. So I think that in the midst of a recurrent crisis, finally, there was clear political and policy guidance to work by all means and with a multisectoral approach. But again, the want, the can, and the must to get them together. I think finally it's how it from us with the perspective of the donor, the key issue is how we ensure that we as donors are effective and we provide the necessary tools and the space for ensuring this dialogue. And I think that the governance structure that were put in place, one of the key issues was putting in place a governance structure which was reporting directly to the president. This is the Haut Commissariat à l'Initiative Nigérienne, Ministre de Nigérien in French, High Commissioner for the Initiatives Nigerian Feed the Nigerians. So it was, you know, a drive. So this is a strong political will. Second, working throughout a large number of partners, including through initiatives like scaling up nutrition, where we, European Union, acts as the donor conveyor. And I would say also that what we have done, again, as a donor, is working toward the different streams of the governing bodies with the most appropriate tools, in particular with the budget support, which for us is, I mean, I will just remember that it's transferring funds directly to the national treasury, underpinned by technical support, accompanying measures. This means including technical assistance, support to coordination, etc. Equally establishing clear benchmarks, and also fourth is the political and policy dialogue. I think that what worked also the fact that in structuring the dialogue with the national authorities, we have used together as donors the comparative advantage. And I can give another example. For example, European Union supports this national coordination and a lot of technical assistance through FAO, and also working together with the World Food Programme. So I think that going back to the governance structure, yes, a strong political and policy will clear governance arrangements, but this is where come the partnership, this is where come the collaboration, and making the dialogue especially be the liaison, the glue to make this structure work and deliver indeed toward common objective, toward the common and shared analysis and the vision. But that's the experience. I think that with SUN, we have worked also in Chad from my previous mandate, that also it stimulated this political will to approach multisectorally the nutrition on the basis of good cooperation with other partners and operational partners that we were already drawing there.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I really appreciate you mentioning that the donor's role in creating the tools and the space for these dialogues is really great. Sam, I see your hands up. Please come in and unmute if you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellen. I think I just wanted to add a few things. In our own case, I think in addition to political will, there is the governance structure that the ambassador was mentioning. In our own case, the government created an institution that brought together the organ that is responsible for nutrition, but also an organ that is responsible for the protection of children, because these are overlapping mandate, and they came together to really create a very strong organization that can bring on board all the stakeholders, including government, central government, local government, districts, to really work together to tackle malnutrition. The second thing is around the single action plan, really to ensure that in the planning tools that are used by different stakeholders, you can capture all the things that are related to nutrition and ensure that they are done in a harmonized way, but also trying to address some objectives, some shared objectives. The third one is mainstreaming nutrition in institutional budget, especially local government. So this was done by ministerial instruction by the Ministry of Finance, compelling all government institutions that have mandate that is related to social protection, human capital development, to ensure that they can really mark a bit of budget that is related to nutrition and centralize it under this instruction, so that the institution that is responsible for nutrition can be able to monitor and we can be able to influence the priorities to achieve a shared objectives. I think These three components have helped a lot in our own case to really push the nutrition agenda and bring together this multi-sectoral approach. When you have this kind of frameworks, even stakeholders, including civil society organizations, development partners, they can join these shared objectives and they can really join efforts to achieve a very big objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. That's really brilliant. The idea of having a single action plan that everyone follows and then mainstreaming into the budget is really critical. Just slightly changing oh, I see Menno, you want to come in. Go ahead, Menno.
Yeah, no, sorry, indeed. It's such an exciting topic. So indeed, it stimulates immediately a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that.
No,
I think I've really appreciated these different interventions. And there are two things that I thought of listening to the interventions. From the setting of this question, two words come forward to me. It's the accountability and trust. Accountability is really the willingness to defend the cause at all times. And the other one, trust, is basically what you need to collaborate together. Now, I really enjoyed what Samuel was just saying before me, because indeed, the way governments are organized, it's by sectors. And this is a structural format that has been adopted and that has to be recognized that this is the organizational structures. These are sectors and they have their accountability within. And so the transversal issues often are not very well recognized in these sort of formats of organization, at least at the central level. What is interesting, what Samuel brought forward, because local government is actually where you have a transversal platform. And often there is a tension between the central level organization and that local level organization. And we see sectors often bypassing local government because that's not part of their structure. So I really like the mentioning by Samuel that at some point you need a new form of organization that will take on the cause of nutrition and can defend it at all costs. Sectors often do not have that accountability. They can do it for a while, but other priorities will move it off the agenda again. And so a new organization that at all times can dedicate to the cause of nutrition, I think is the experience, at least for me, really shows it that once you have that in place, you can continue struggling forward. It's not going to be easy. It's very dirty. It's very difficult, but you have at least a dedicated counterpart. I think that is critical, that then kind of breaches the transversal issues in the organizational format. Thank you.
Thanks, Menno. And I can see that Samuel, being the Minister of Local Government, is nodding vigorously in agreement with you. Before that input, I was just going to try to adapt a question that came from the audience in the Q&A, and it relates to, fragmentation and financing and funding streams and how to make them less fragmented. But I'm going to put a twist on it first and turn to you, Megan. The need for multi-sectoral governance in nutrition does apply to the donors as well. And I think having a good coordination structure at the level of the donors would help a lot in terms of reducing fragmentation that is at least caused by donor programming. So I was wondering if you could speak to lessons from USAID on this topic from where you sit. Over to you, Megan.
Thanks so much for the question, Ellen. And I've been tracking this closely. The comments of my colleagues have been so sort of spot on this. And I think, one of the reasons I'm pleased to represent USAID in today's discussion is because we have this, a little bit of a unique structure of being able to engage in the global dialogue and global evidence on nutrition, but also really be informed by our field missions and implementing partners on the ground. And I can tell you, when USAID, who has been working in nutrition for 60 years, really started a new chapter in working in this multisectorally, I would say, was about 10 or 12 years ago at the beginning of the Feed the Future initiative, right, which was attempting to really bring together lessons learned from the health sector with our partners in agriculture and economic growth to address nutrition more multisectorally. And the first place we looked, of course, was our missions, right, which is our staff on the ground in countries and our implementing partners, who really figured out quite a bit early on in terms of how to sort of design multisectorally, right? We can't think about this after the fact. We have to design with the idea that we're going to be working across sectors, working with ministries of local government, for example, from the start. And I think it takes a while for the global infrastructures to catch up with that, to be honest. And I would put USAID in there, even though we were asking for multisectoral planning and implementation at the field level and among our partners. It's to confess, it's taken us about a decade to catch up at the global level. And I'm proud to say that we have, and that we now have at USAID globally a Nutrition Leadership Council who structures our work, bringing in together, as I think my colleague from Kinshasa said, sort of like all of the parties, right? We have our health sector colleagues, our food systems colleagues, and our humanitarian assistance colleagues coming together and establishing joint global priorities and looking at data and evidence together across sectors. This has been happening on the ground for a long time, and I think it does take our global structures a while to catch up. The good news is we are, and we've seen a really, I think, transformational impact in the way that we think about nutrition at USAID and the way that we work together. And as a donor, really thinking about the role that we have in leveraging our work in the food system, in the health system, in the humanitarian systems, sort of specifically to leverage our work in nutrition, working under the sort of guidance of a chief nutritionist who helps us bring together sort of one vision on this. And then making sure that we are talking to each other literally every day about sort of how we are working across sectors. So I would just say that structure really, it matters. And it doesn't just matter. It is not an issue to be left to our colleagues who are doing the important frontline work on the ground. They're doing it out of necessity, but the best way I think that we can support them at a global level is to recognize that that hard work, that transverse work that Menno was just talking about, is something that we need to do too, right? And I think I'm really proud of the work that USAID has done to restructure its own work in nutrition in the last couple of years. I think it better aligns us with our colleagues working in the Sun movement in countries. And it helps us better support our missions. It also really helps us design better programs. If we're going to fund programs aimed to improve diets, reduce malnutrition, reduce wasting, we need to think multisectorally from the beginning about that. That means bringing in different types of expertise, recognizing that we have to work with different types of actors than we may be most comfortable with in a particular sector. And really using a common set of evidence and data to bring us together is I think, a powerful way to do that. So thanks so much for the question, and we're going to keep trying to get this right.
Thanks, Megan. That's really, it's been really interesting to see how a large organization like USAID has evolved over time to embrace this multisectoralism for nutrition. I see, Joachim, you have your hand up, so over to you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to build on what Megan said about USAID and the program. We actually have a good example here in the southern part of the country, in Kasai, which has a very high level of malnutrition, where USAID has a very good multisectoral program called Budika Didi. And we have a program starting just next to it, inspired by that. But and I think that those are good examples. But at the same time, I want to make another point, because it's even better when we have flexibility at the local level and at the country level. And that is lacking in the international development cooperation system. Too many donors have too strict funding streams and too strict rules for partners at the ground to be able to adapt to each other and to be able to have multisectoral approaches across projects and across programs. And I think that is something important to bring forward in the global discussion.
Very, very nicely put. I think everyone would appreciate flexibility in the funding to be able to adapt to the needs on the ground and not have it being driven from above. I think that's a super, super important point. That just as a segue to another question I have around how you prioritize and how prioritization occurs. I don't think, and we've heard from the other comments before, there's no blueprint for what needs to be done. There are always choices, and there have to be trade-offs by definition. And so I'm just wondering if anyone on the panel would like to comment on approaches to making decisions, discussing and making trade-offs, and how you prioritize either your resources in those trade-offs or how you spend your time and your energy, since everyone makes choices there too. So would anybody like to pick up on the question of prioritization? I don't see any hands, so, oh, good. Shahid, please go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of the prioritization, from the recent experience, I can share one example from Bangladesh. I mean, recently Bangladesh is having both most vulnerable on climate and definitely on COVID. So the government ownership, I mean, the political stability, those are the major drivers, how to really address the nutrition component. And we have seen in the last 2 years, even if with the very limited resources, government was very much convinced to really reach out to the people who needs most. And either with cash transfer, either with food distribution, either with vaccination enlistment, extending the social protection components towards the subnational level, reaching out to the most vulnerable people. That was the very much a good example of prioritizing the people who needs the most. And that really relates the thoughts that Joachim and the other panelists are talking about. That's what is the political will. I would say, what is the political will? That really generates from the political stability of the country. And often we see the global experience that this political instability that turns into different conflicts. And countries are not really able to respond to the need of any pandemic like COVID or any climate resilient approaches as such. I will stop here and over to Ilan.
Thank you, Shahid, and especially thank you for bringing up the issue of what I call the 3 C's of climate, COVID, and also we heard earlier about conflict. They're multisectoral issues in and of themselves, and they do affect our programming. I see that Ambassador has her hand up, so please come in, Ambassador.
Yes, indeed. Let me develop more about our experience in Niger with the tool, which is the budget support. Because in fact, the budget support is meant by itself to be, let's say, the most flexible, because it goes to the national treasury and it should contribute for the country to fund its priorities. But I see 2 main challenges. And we are observing this as we speak, I would say, because following both, a regional context, economic context, but also the climate, the weather conditions, and the agricultural campaign are very bad. I think that maybe one of the issues on which really we need to be able to support the national and the local authorities is how we are sequencing the different interventions. This means what has to be, how we as donors, but also how we support the national authorities and the partners to prioritize between what has to be done today and tomorrow. So today and for tomorrow, but how at the same time we are supporting reforms, medium and long-term actions, which will not bear fruit immediately, but they are absolutely important and crucial, so as the overall vulnerabilities in all the sectors which lead to malnutrition are addressed. I think that the prioritization is crucial, and not only for us as a donor, but especially with the partners and as regards their own capacity to move in this sense. This is why, sorry to make in a bit, a lot of apology of the budget support. I think that this was the choice we have taken in 2020 when the pandemic emerged. We have considerably restructured a big package of budget support we front-loaded and adapted a number of conditionalities, I would say rather benchmark than conditionalities, notably for the general eligibility criteria, so we can continue a dialogue and people do not, the partners do not lose the focus on the reforms and what, you know, it helps going through the crisis while keeping for the second and for the, you know, for the now for this year, for 2021, although the situation is not, as you can see, it's not necessarily better, keeping also a number of critical sectoral and, you know, very specific reforms in the different sectors. So we combined, you know, the more general reforms, especially in the economic sector, in the macroeconomic reforms, with the one in the specific sectors. And maybe the third, you know, going back to the sequencing, is really the humanitarian and development. And there I think, and I make the advocacy for nutrition, because I say it very often with my very long experience, you know, nutrition sometimes, especially child and infant nutrition, and especially the malnutrition, acute malnutrition, is sometimes the epiphenomenon. And with the best will in the world, you know, donors are very much sometimes, and also operational partners, to fund and to support the humanitarian action, because this is what saves the lives. But at the same time, we need to act on a multisectoral approach and in all the sectors, so we are not getting there anymore. And this is what we incentivize with the budget support in Niger, a roadmap, so that the sector, first the health sector, but also the connected sectors, ensure that they have appropriate human resources, appropriate capacity building. So nutrition is not something that we deal only when it's a crisis, it gets emotion, and then we forgot everything, and you know. So these are a bit the views from a country that needs a lot of support, but we see also a lot of opportunities.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I'm not going to try to summarize all the many important things you just said, because I want to now shift the conversation downstream to think about delivery and some of the lessons learned on about how multi-sectoral frameworks and plans actually translate to the local level. And we've had a number of really fantastic questions in the Q&A, and I'm not going to go through each of them individually, but I do want to turn to the panelists on here who, as I say, eat, sleep, and dream about implementation. What are the most important lessons you've learned about how to translate plans into action and impact at the local level? How do you translate a multi-sectoral plan into something that's community-based and people-centered? And I'm going to start with you, Pooja, because you haven't said anything just yet, and then I'll move on to Pooja and hopefully Sam if he's still on. Over, Pooja.
Great. Thanks, Ellen. I was just listening to the previous speakers, and now just thinking, so one of the main sort of responsibility for implementing organization, for implementer like me, is how do I sort of simplify these complex frameworks and systems into action-oriented plans. You know, some of the frameworks and languages, even I find it difficult to understand. So I think the first step as a program we took was, you know, just cutting through the noise and really keeping communities at the center, you know, and really asking ourselves, what does this evidence-focused, costed, you know, multi-sectoral plan mean for a health worker? You know, what does it mean for a farmer? What does it mean for a mayor or a deputy mayor? You know, what are the working context? What are the barriers and enablers? And I think then sort of coming upwards, I think that sort of really has worked in Nepal. And I think the starting point, I feel, should always be the communities, the households. And I think the first step is to really work with the local stakeholders and make their roles and responsibilities very crystal clear from the beginning, so that they can see the bigger picture and their contribution in improving nutrition in their community, in their district. I also feel that we need to really move the conversation from these technical interventions to really improving local governance, and the previous speakers have talked about, and also strengthening the delivery systems, you know, and the community platforms on how do we sort of close that know and do gap. I think that's very, very important. And I think one of the important lessons we've learned in Nepal is we need a combination of government structures, CSOs, private sectors, to deliver these multisectoral nutrition interventions to different target groups. We have different needs and really different contexts. I'll stop at that, Ellen.
Oh, thank you so much. You touched on one of the points, your very first words were around simplify. And I know there were questions from the audience about how can these complex ideas be made understandable and simplified. How about you, Dr. Shahid? Do you want to come in and talk about your experience in translating plans into action and community and people-centered approaches?
Thank you, Ellen. I would like to really reflect back Bangladesh experience. It's a joint initiative of multisectoral programming in Bangladesh from the government and from the development partners. And we have seen for the last almost a decade, the gradual transition of ownership from development partners to government. And that has been translated into formulation of the policies like the food security nutrition policy and dedicated house, Bangladesh National Nutrition Council with a 10 years plan on national plan of action. And they have come up with a very specified minimum nutrition package with 20 indicators that has been distributed among major 8 ministries. Those are really investing a large amount of money into the annually in the nutrition. So from the public expenditure review on nutrition, that shows that these are the 7 to 8 ministries that are mostly engaged. And the plan has been really translated into in 3 ways. One is the system strengthening component, then participation and engagement of the local stakeholders, and hearing the voice of the local communities. I mean, the plan has been formulated from the very bottom-up approach from sub-district to district, and that has been formulated into a national plan. So that is number one. And number two is, it's very much important to see the political will, how that has been really translated into last more than a decade in Bangladesh. I mean, from the top of the government power, I mean, who is the prime minister and president, and then coming up to the different director generals and different ministries. The issue that has been clearly evident in Bangladesh, the political will has given a momentum in terms of the progress on the nutrition and multisectoral programming in Bangladesh. And at the same time, there is an enabling environment working for the Civil Society Alliance. They're also coming up with different options of creating a lesson learned workshops, lesson learned sharing platforms, and government is also collaborating with the 5 wings of Sun movement in Bangladesh. So there is a combination of government, development partners, and CSOs together in Bangladesh for the last 1 decade. Thank you. I will stop here and over to you.
Thank you so much. And Sam, did you want to come here on this issue since you're representing local government and it all happens at the local level?
Thank you very much, Ellen. I hope you can hear me. I lost internet a few minutes ago. Yeah. So well, to add to what my colleagues have said, I think there are 2 more things that I can add. One is really identifying what works. What works in terms of identifying, some initiative of the local communities that they've tried and they work, and you can build on that. And in some cases, you can scale it up. For in other cases, you can adjust it to other, places, realities. In our own case, we have something we call Child Scorecard, and this Child Scorecard initiative has played a very critical role in terms of consolidating data and on accessibility and usage of integrated interventions at child level, especially during the first 1,000 days of life. So you can look at what is happening around and identify those data available. Second, you can also be able to integrate the single action plan I was talking about with what we call in Mexico, that is performance contract with local communities. In this case, you can rally all the existing opportunities and stakeholders on these interventions. So it becomes something that is like an initiative of local communities, but then when they couple it with what works on the ground, you can get tangible results in a very, very short time. So this is an experience that we have seen work, and it can work in other places. Let me stop.
Thank you, Sam. You've actually made a great segue to another one of the questions that I wanted to ask, which is around measurement that matters. And I think there are two or maybe 3 sides to this question around measurement. And the first thing is that I know we've had evaluation after evaluation that's shown that successful nutrition programs have robust measurement, learning, and evaluation actually embedded in the DNA of their strategies and approaches. so that things can be adapted based on what's working. And I know this is certainly true in Rwanda, Nepal, and Bangladesh. So I'd love to hear from panelists' impressions on how to do this well. How have you been able to create a learning environment at the implementation level? We just heard about child scorecards, which I think are extremely important, but what are some other ideas on how to make learning at the local level work? Anything you want to say about performance monitoring and accountability, which is what what Sam was just talking about, and then tracking progress in a meaningful way. Are there data gaps or things that we really need to focus on? I know it's a very broad question, so I'm going to do a bit of a round robin and call on a few of you, but I'll start again with Pooja around learning environment, data gaps, performance monitoring. Anything you want to say from the Nepal perspective that you think would be important to hear? Over to you, Pooja.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. I think in Nepal, there is from every side, donors, government, implementers, there's a real appreciation for evidence and data, and which is great. And many of the plans we make are very sort of data informed. Mm-hmm. And in the project I work, we have a very robust MER system. But I think when we actually come at the implementation level and we work with multiple systems, different sectors, mandates, information system, personalities, we have to acknowledge that we don't know a lot of things. And, and we need to have this combination blended approach where we be data informed, but also acknowledge that, there's a lot of experiential learning along the way. And in many cases, we have to use our best guesses with the limited information we have. I think in my country, one of the challenge has been, how do we translate this appreciation for data at the policy donor level, implementer level, down to the local government's level? How do we develop this culture of data-informed programming? Has been a continuous effort. And I think it needs skills, it needs resources, it needs support, and we need to take a very systematic long-term plan. And some of the tools we've used is really, again, I want to again bring back to the community, the clients we serve, trying to sort of having this client feedback system in place, adding a lot of formative research component, making like open communication with the donors and the government of what is working and what is not, creating this informal learning events, exposure visits is very important. And I think being very brave about taking calculated risk and also being open about failures of what is not working. And I think failures offer a lot of important learning opportunities. And I think having donors, and in Nepal, we've been very sort of supported by USAID. Having donors who are supportive of such approaches is key. And in terms of what we need, I think I feel we know very little about the governance related indicators. How do we sort of measure convergence? What are the trade-offs? How can we measure trade-offs of integration? These sort of implementation related data, I think is missing from the implementation world.
Thank you, Pooja. You made a number of really great points, and I love the idea of these exchanges for learning. I've seen them in so many different projects, really having an impact, exchanges within countries, but also exchanges between countries. I think that has been a really successful strategy that many different organizations have really gotten behind to help advance this culture of learning. I like that you brought up the removing the fear of failure too, and taking calculated risks. These are really important. And then finally, being flexible on the indicators is something some of the Q&A questions have been, and not only thinking about outcome indicators, but really understanding the process and the implementation process and those intermediate issues that are actionable, that can allow for course correction. Dr. Shahid, do you want to come in with anything from Bangladesh on this question of measurement that matters?
Yeah, I would love to really share. As I mentioned in my previous statement, that Bangladesh National Nutrition Council, which is the hub of nutrition, multisectoral nutrition in Bangladesh, coordinating across multi-ministerial layer, and also they're coordinating the subnational level nutrition implementation. And they have developed a minimum nutrition package, as I mentioned, with the 20 indicators. And we are going to start the nutrition surveillance system. And also, we, as part of the Nutrition for Growth commitment, there are multiple commitments from Bangladesh we have made. Significant investment on social protection and also financial tracking. The challenges Pooja mentioned is very clear. We have Bangladesh Demographic Health Survey, multi-indicator cluster survey, then household income expenditure survey, multiple data source sets are there. The triangulation and utilization and referring to the different subject specific or topic specific requirement, and that is being evidenced through those data set, which requires a specific capacity, time, and resource. So we have the challenges in Bangladesh, but the good thing is what we have so far done, that triangulation and making these with the multi-sectoral participation, they have come up with a very common set of indicators that has been introduced, and the whole monitoring system has been digitized under Bangladesh National Nutrition Council. We have started the journey, and the sharing experience at the district and sub-district level, that has allowed enough space from the data what they are going to really put into the system, and they can also get the feedback on that. But I would like to really request all the listeners and definitely the panelists that data-based or evidence-based decision-making, that needs a huge resource investment and capacity. And if we think that the gradual transition of development partners' contribution should be taken up by government itself, we need to really look forward for a longer-term investment with a specific plan that we have already done in Bangladesh, but there are miles to go, looking at the 2030 or 2040 like this. And this is a good example of Bangladesh, that we have started the journey, having some good experiences and also some failure cases in Bangladesh, from where we are also learning. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. You've made a number of really excellent points. A couple of times you mentioned the importance of financial tracking, and I do want to bring that up. It's financial tracking, both not just where the donor resources are going, but domestic, and how to improve and track the allocation of resources domestically to these programs is really helpful. You raised the idea of triangulating the data and having a plan for all the partners to triangulate the data together. And I think that speaks also to a point that Joachim made earlier, which is, this joint analysis and how important that is for creating the buy-in and working together. And then you made an important point around the time frame that I think we haven't really fully appreciated, is that these are not there. You need to have the right time frame involved and think long term. I think the ambassador actually said a plan for now and a plan for the future. And I think we have to remember that, we need that plan for the future and have the right indicators along the way so that we know that we're moving in the right direction. Time is getting short, and I don't want to shortchange what will be the last set of questions that I want to ask. I think we have about 10 minutes left before we go into closing remarks. And so I'm going to ask each of you, I call this the lightning round, and I want to ask each of you, if you had one message that you want us to leave with, a priority or call to action to make multisectoral collaborations to address malnutrition more effective, what would it be? Please be concise. I want your takeaway message in a few words, not necessarily a soundbite, but something that we can all remember. And I think I'll start with you, Joachim. What's your takeaway message in a few words? Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. So it would be joint analysis, joint objectives, and invest in coordination. As I said before, I think that's the most important aspect. And then I would add maybe the advocate for flexibility for actors at different levels, because it's very hard to collaborate without flexibility.
That's brilliant. I think the flexibility theme has come out a lot. How about you, Sam? What's your key takeaway? Samuel.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. I think, addressing malnutrition should start in the household. I think the citizens in every individual household, they have the capacity and the powers to play a big role. I think also stakeholders should try to respond to initiatives of the community. Every community has their way of understanding, and it can serve, it can serve a great deal of, input into influencing what happens. But I think sustainability requires to have longer term plans. So if we join together the efforts, we can create impact. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. How about you, Ambassador? Can you give us your takeaway, please?
Well, I would say today's discussion really strengthens our strong belief and commitment that a joint evidence-based approach, trust, dialogue, and mutual accountability are the ingredients for success to implement a multi-sectoral approach, which will deliver for the people, for the governments, and for those that they are representing and they are supposed to lead and to be accountable toward.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the trust factor is so important, the dialogue and the mutual accountability. How about, let's turn to Megan, over to you. What's your takeaway?
Thanks so much. And I say this as a health person by training. So preface this to say that we have to recognize that nutrition touches on all aspects of our development work, and it is not just health system work. It requires inclusion and collaboration of many actors. And if impact issues like diet quality, which are essential to making longer term impact on nutrition, we have to get comfortable in getting invested in the interests of a wide range of public, private, and local actors to ensure we're making movement forward. So our success in nutrition is actually predicated on the joint success of others. We can't do it alone, and we have to keep this in mind right from the beginning. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. Over to you, Dr. Shahid.
I'm really confused because of so many things are coming up. And here the panels and the audience is the combination of the good leaders. I would say the good politics for nutrition is very important. That should be the takeaway, because of with the recent COP conference, I mean, with the pandemic, when I don't know how much we are going to really face in the next 1 decade. So how about the political commitment that you are talking about with the Global Sun movement? How much we can really reach out. So good politics for nutrition would be the takeaway from me.
Thank you so much. And Sam, over to you. What's your key takeaway? A call to action, a priority.
I think increased financing would be very, very critical, especially in developing countries. And somebody talked about brain drain. I think really building on communities' priorities is very, very critical. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I know there was a lot of comment in the Q&A about the importance of financing. So I think that is a message that will resonate. And Pooja, what's your key takeaway?
Mine is to move the focus from plans to people, really actively engage and empower communities so we ensure we listen to them and respond to their voice and expectations.
Wow, that's very concise. Thank you. Power to the people. And finally, we started with you, Menno. And so I'd like to give you the final word. I think that's the final word. I think I've gotten to everyone else. So give me your key takeaway. What's your priority, a call to action?
Yeah, it's so much has been said, and indeed, so much needs to be done. So rather than one keyword, I think it's a few things. The first of all, what I take from these discussions is really the upstream and downstream efforts need to go hand in hand. Administrations are often more geared towards or feel better at upstream work. You need it to get the money, to get your hands on the money. But you can't do it without the downstream work, and they need to inform each other. I think those two, wherever you start, that is not important, but ultimately those two need to come together. The other one is really, I think, just the term nutrition for growth already implies it, is that we go about progress, we go about change. And so really trying to get away from kind of accommodating ourselves in doing business as usual, but really sort of push the courage to promote change and do things really differently. And the last one, which I really liked in some of the interventions, is the long term. You have to be in it for the long haul. These are new institutions, new policies. It takes ages to really mature them and render them sustainable. This doesn't go over a few years. And here, I really emphasize the fact that even our own institutions, Mega alluded a bit to it, and we are often not geared to it. Our instruments, just the donor funding, is geared for short-term programs, maximum 5-6 years. But how do we sustain something over 10-15 years? So really be in it for the long haul, also for people who support this process. Even our rotation schemes do not often match the need to support long-term developments.
Wow, thank you so much, Menno. You made a lot of really great points. No more business as usual, be in it for the long haul and having flexible instruments. I think now's a good time to turn over to our co-host from Nutrition International for some summary and closing remarks. Before doing that, I just want to thank everyone in the audience for submitting so many excellent questions. I maybe didn't ask every single one of them or ask them precisely as you asked them, but I did try to get to the spirit of them. And if there are any burning questions that weren't answered, we will take note of that. And I have the questions when we put together the summary report. We'll take into account the questions that you've posed. So now, without further ado, I want to invite our co-host from Nutrition International, Dr. Mandana Rabi, to make summary and closing remarks. Dr. Rabi is a medical doctor with a PhD in nutrition sciences, who's currently vice president for global technical services, and she's chief technical advisor at Nutrition International. Prior to joining NI, Mandana worked for UNICEF. She was also the founding executive director of the Nutrition Institute at the New York Academy of Sciences, and she was a nutrition advisor to the Ministry of Health in Iran. So Dr. Rabi, the floor is yours for some summary takeaways and closing remarks. Over to you, Mandana.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the speakers. I think a wealth of information, knowledge, and experiences has been shared here today. And Ellen, I think your lightning round has generated a good amount of high voltage power. So I'm not going to claim to summarize, perhaps maybe just sharing some of the highlights and what I have in my notes and some significant lessons for myself and hopefully for the colleagues working in the field. For me, it came through very strongly that the key essence of this multisectoral approach is coordination, integration, and a systems approach to programming for nutrition. At Nutrition International, we use this term, the optimal mix of interventions. And that's about, using analyses, using evidence, providing technical support so that we understand the local context, we understand the local issues and gaps, and then we choose the right mix of interventions. And this means also linking the micro level and macro level actions. And that's basically the essence of multisectoral nutrition programming. I heard that the structure of this support is really important. It has to be fit for purpose. It could be done through various mechanisms and various structures working across different sectors in a matrix approach. And ideally, it was even discussed that a single structure dedicated to bringing actors of nutrition together and strengthening the decision-making would be really important. And some of the successes that we have as case studies are really pointing to the importance of these structures. This could also be linked to champions for nutrition and stronger advocacy for bringing nutrition action together. While, of course, we advocate for coming together and having a strong, powerful structure for support of nutrition, we also want to stay open-minded to partnerships, to innovation and collaboration. And again, if we want to be able to use our resources to the best, to be nimble and address all these new and emerging issues in the world today, we have to have that open-mindedness and go through really innovative ways of finding the right partners. it resonated a lot for me, this issue of timelines, having realistic timelines, the fact that we have to be in this for the long haul. At the same time, I also appreciated, our colleague Joachim talked about linking with the humanitarian action. And we know that some sectors just function on different timing and on different flow of decisions. And in my own work, I think that actually has been one of the areas of challenge in multisectoral work, that you have to be adapting and responding in real time, but also being in this for the long haul and planning for the long term. So really bringing these two sectors together, I think that's something that we are exploring again in my organization, and we would love to work together more and better to understand how we can be more efficient in this building these linkages. The data and accountability issue again was highlighted, which I think is a theme we are recognizing in many of these side events and the conversations related to nutrition for growth. And I think there can be a good, strong, and immediate action point for us in this. Defining the right indicators, coming together and agreeing on those, developing tools that help with the easier, more straightforward decision-making and coordination, tracking progress and reporting on the right process as well as outcome indicators would be important. And I think, a lot of us, again, within our sectors or within our organizations, sometimes develop these tools or maybe even sometimes reinvent the wheel. And I think even this group together with our corresponding organizations coming together and agreeing on an agenda for data and accountability would make a significant difference. And then some last thoughts. I think it's also important, of course, multisectoral action, as we heard from different perspectives, is quite valuable and highly needed. I want to still advocate that this has to be done based on the right theory of change and right implementation pathway. Why are we trying to bring the certain sectors in a certain context together is important, and through which plausible pathways we want to see action. Again, I think this is an area where, in our support to our countries and programs is I think an area that needs more clarification. You don't want to coordinate everything everywhere. It has to be really well thought and concentrated through a very plausible pathway for action, and then with the right kinds of support and investments. I think, again, this is an area that we can have an action agenda coming together and clarifying those where we need multisectoral action for what purpose. And then eventually, another lesson from my own experience is that, nutrition sometimes in these multisectoral conversations has the risk of getting lost just because of the sheer size of some of the sectors. If you want to engage with the financial sector or with the social protection sector, working in the government, coming from the health background, nothing wrong with that, but then that doesn't prepare you for engaging effectively with the conversations that are, with sectors that are dealing with much kind of different scale of activities and discussions and decisions. So I think, again, as the nutrition community, we have to help each other, prepare each other, strengthen each other for being able to effectively engage in those conversations. So thanks a lot again to the organizers and all the speakers and attendees, and thanks, Ellen, for the great job of moderating this discussion. Over to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Mandan. I'm glad I left you adequate time to really share those kind of pearls of wisdom. And I really, truly cannot wait to see the final report, because as you said, every one of you on the panel and the audience with your input have really created a lot of high voltage ideas to take forward for Nutrition for Growth. So I do want to thank the co-hosts, the Power of Nutrition, Nutrition International, all of you panelists who have joined us literally from every corner of the world with virtually no technological challenges encountered, yay, as well as participants who've joined us today. At one point, I think I saw over 120 people on this call and for this session, which is really fantastic. So I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today, for the excellent conversation and for your participation. And as I said before, a recording will be made available. A report will come out early next year. And please share this widely with your networks. There were many ideas and topics I didn't get to that I wanted to talk about, and we'll share them for next time. But without further ado, thank you so much, each and every one of you, for taking the time for this important conversation. And with that, I'll say goodbye and thank you. Have a great day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.